Chapter 1. The Invitation to Snowridge Manor. The little Belgian had never much cared for Christmas. Too many emotions, too much pudding, too many people pretending to be happier than they were. Yet, on the 23rd of December, 1936, Hercule Poirot sat in his impeccably ordered flat in London and studied a square of heavy cream-coloured paper with genuine curiosity. The card was bordered in holly leaves, so sharply embossed they seemed ready to prick the finger. In the centre, written in confident copperplate, stood the words Sir Reginald Harrington, requests the pleasure of the company of Monsieur Hercule Poirot at Snowridge Manor, Yorkshire for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day 24th or 25th, December 1936 RSVP. Beneath the formal invitation someone had added, in a hurried scrawl quite unlike the rest, "Your presence may prevent a tragedy." Poirot turned the card over twice, sniffed it, nothing but the faint scent of cedar and sealing wax, and raised one expressive eyebrow. "Tiens," he murmured to the empty room. "One does not summon Hercule Poirot like a doctor for a sore throat. One begs, one pleads, one offers large fees. One does not command." He laid the card upon the silver tray, where less interesting correspondence went to die, and tried to forget it. He failed. The phrase, "prevent a tragedy," echoed with the persistence of a wrong note in an otherwise perfect symphony. That evening, as the gas lamps of London flickered against wet pavements, a telegram arrived. "Snowridge Manor cut off by storms. Expected stop your room is prepared. Stop, please come. Stop, Reginald Harrington." Poirot sighed, stroked his moustaches with loving care, and reached for the telephone. "Very well," he told the instrument, "I shall go to the rescue of Christmas." The journey north of the following morning was a trial sent by a malevolent deity. The train from King's Cross crawled through frozen landscapes, windows rimed with frost, passengers huddled like miserable sheep. At York, Poirot changed to a branch line that wheezed its way into the dales as though every mile cost it pain. Finally, a motor car met him, chauffeured by a taciturn Yorkshireman who answered every polite inquiry with aye or nay, and sometimes nothing at all. Snow had begun to fall in earnest, thick silent flakes that swallowed sound. The road climbed between dry stone walls half buried under white, and at last the headlights picked out wrought-iron gates flanked by stone pineapples green with moss. A sign, almost obliterated by snow, read, "Snowridge Manor." The drive curved through darkness and skeleton trees until the house appeared. A great rambling pile of Tudor brick and Jacobean gables, every window blazing gold against the night. Someone, somewhere, was burning a fortune in electricity to welcome him. The front door, black oak studded with iron, swung open before the car had fully stopped. A tall butler with the solemn face of a bishop emerged, flanked by two footmen carrying storm lanterns. "Monsieur Poirot, Sir Reginald's compliments, sir. This way, if you please. Mind the step. Ice." Poirot stepped into a hall that smelled of beeswax, wood smoke and fresh pine. A Christmas tree, the height of 3 men, glittered in the minstrel's gallery, hung with glass icicles and real candles already lit. Garlands of holly and ivy roped the stone staircase. Mistletoe dangled like a dare above every doorway. From somewhere deeper in the house came the sound of a gramophone playing "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen," slightly too fast, as though the machine itself were nervous. The butler took Poirot's hat, coat and galoshes with ceremonial gravity. "Sir Reginald is delayed with the wine cellar, sir. Lady Harrington will receive you in the long gallery." "This way." Poirot followed, patent leather shoes clicking on flagstones worn hollow by 4 centuries of anxious airs. They passed suits of armour festooned with paper chains, ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow the little detective with disapproval. The long gallery ran the length of the south front. One side was all tall windows now rattling under the assault of wind, the other oak panelling and a fireplace large enough to roast a reindeer. A dozen people turned as Poirot entered. Conversation died like a candle in a draught. A woman of perhaps 50 detached herself from the group and came forward. She wore midnight blue velvet and diamonds that flashed like frost. Her smile was perfect, practiced, and entirely without warmth. "Monsieur Poirot, how perfectly thrilling! I'm Clarissa Harrington. My husband is desolate not to greet you himself, but the cellar thermometer has chosen this moment to misbehave. One must humour a cellar at Christmas, mustn't one?" "Madame, one must humour many things at Christmas," Poirot replied, bowing over her hand. "I am enchanted." Clarissa Harrington turned to the room at large. "Everyone, this is the famous Hercule Poirot. We are now officially the safest house in England." A ripple of polite laughter. Poirot registered faces the way a jeweller notes flaws. Sir Reginald's younger brother, Colonel Harrington, red-faced, blustering, moustache like a yard brush. His wife, Evelyn, thin, twittering, eyes darting everywhere. The son and heir, Geoffrey, 28, handsome in the careless way of men who have never been denied anything, currently scowling into a whisky. The daughter, Diana, 25, auburn hair, green eyes that met Poirot's with defiant amusement. A cousin, Miles Ashford, sleek, dark, smiling too much. An elderly aunt, Miss Felicity Harrington, deaf as a gatepost and knitting something violent in scarlet. A governess or companion, Poirot was not yet sure which. Pale, quiet, hands clasped too tightly, Miss Graves. And finally, standing a little apart by the window, a young man in clerical black with a face so beautiful it seemed unfair. The Reverend David Whitcomb. Clarissa clapped her hands. "Cocktails! Geoffrey, do be useful. Monsieur Poirot, what will you take? A sirop de cassis, if you please. Very little water." Geoffrey Harrington raised an eyebrow, but obeyed. As he crossed the room, Poirot noticed the slight tremor in the young man's hand. "Nerves! Drink both!" Colonel Harrington boomed. "So you're the little Belgian wizard, eh? Read about you in the papers. Hope you've brought your magnifying glass. We've a ghost that rattles chains in the West Wing. Mon Colonel, ghosts do not interest me. People who pretend to be ghosts, however. Those can be most illuminating." A small silence. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 6, deep and sombre. Clarissa laughed too brightly. "No ghosts tonight, only family and friends," she added, with a glance at the clergyman that might have meant anything. Dinner, Poirot was informed, would be at 8:30. Until then, would he care to see his room? The green suite, best view in the house, fire already lit. As the butler led him upward along a corridor lined with dim portraits, Poirot paused at a window. Outside, the snow fell thicker than ever, erasing the world. No tracks led to the house. None would lead away. He became aware that someone had followed him. The governess, Miss Graves, stood a few paces behind, clutching a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I must speak with you alone before midnight tomorrow." Her eyes were wide, frightened, and something else, ashamed. "Before midnight, mademoiselle? How very Cinderella! But yes, we shall speak. Hercule Poirot is always at the service of a lady in distress." She gave a tiny, grateful nod and fled. Poirot watched her go, then turned back to the window. In the glass he saw his own reflection superimposed upon the storm. Small, neat, impeccably dressed, moustaches magnificent. "Eh bien," he murmured to the night, "it begins. Already the little grey cells, they stir. Somewhere in this house of Christmas cheer, tragedy is dressing itself in tinsel and waiting for the stroke of 12. Behind him, the candles on the distant Christmas tree flickered as though someone had breathed on them, though no one had moved. The snow kept falling. Chapter 2. Gathering Storm and Festive Facades. The green suite smelled of applewood smoke and starch. A fire crackled with theatrical enthusiasm, as though paid to perform. Poirot inspected the room with approval. A four-poster bed hung in dark green damask, a writing desk already supplied with crested notepaper, and, most welcome of all, a small electric kettle for the making of tisane. Someone understood the needs of a Belgian in Yorkshire. He unpacked with military precision 3 silk handkerchiefs folded into exact squares, a travelling case of eau de Cologne, the little leather notebook in which he recorded observations that others called trivial. From Poirot, the window, he could see nothing now but swirling white. Snowridge Manor had become an island. At 8 o'clock, a gong boomed through the corridors like the voice of an impatient giant. Poirot descended. The dining room was a cathedral of oak and candlelight. A table long enough for a medieval banquet glittered with crystal and silver. The great chandelier had been lowered, and every candle lit. 100 flames danced upon the polished surface and turned the faces of the guests into masks. Sir Reginald Harrington stood at the head of the table, finally emerged from his cellar. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of aristocratic nose that looked as if it had been offended since birth. His dinner jacket sat perfectly, yet his eyes were bloodshot, and his hand rested too heavily on the back of his chair. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice resonant with forced jollity, "we are snowed in, the telephone wires are down, and the world has graciously agreed to leave us alone for 48 hours. Let us therefore be merry." A footman pulled out Poirot's chair. Third on the right, excellent position for observation. To his left sat Diana Harrington, smelling faintly of jasmine and mischief. On his right, the Reverend David Whitcomb, whose black clerical waistcoat seemed to absorb the candlelight rather than reflect it. "Tell me, mademoiselle," Poirot murmured as the soup, a clear consommé garnished with slivers of truffle, was served. "Does your father always summon detectives to his Christmas table, or am I a special treat?" Diana's green eyes sparkled. "Papa believes in insurance, Monsieur Poirot. One insures the house against fire, the silver against theft, and the family against unpleasantness." "Unpleasantness," Poirot repeated softly. "A delicate word, like calling murder a social solecism." Across the table, Geoffrey Harrington laughed too loudly and drained his wine-glass in a single swallow. A footman refilled it instantly. Colonel Harrington was already holding forth about the unreliability of servants since the war. Aunt Felicity knitted furiously, needles clicking like a clock running backwards. Miles Ashford watched everyone with the polite attention of a man calculating odds. Sir Reginald raised his glass. "To absent friends," he said, and for a moment the mask slipped. Something raw and painful flickered across his face. Poirot sipped. The claret was magnificent. A Chateau Margaux, 1918. Only a man expecting to die or desperate to forget would open such a bottle on Christmas Eve. Conversation flowed in careful eddies. The Reverend Whitcomb spoke of his parish in a village 5 miles away, cut off now, of course, by the snow. Miss Graves said almost nothing. Her knuckles were white around the stem of her glass. Clarissa Harrington steered every topic away from money, politics, or the war with the skill of a battleship avoiding mines. After the removes, roast goose with chestnut, stuffing, a baron of beef bleeding pink, a flaming plum pudding carried in to ragged applause, the ladies withdrew, the men remained for port and cigars. Sir Reginald waved away the decanter when it reached him. "Brandy for me," he said hoarsely. "The good stuff, the 76. Geoffrey looked up sharply. "That's the last bottle, father." "Then let it be the last," Sir Reginald replied, and there was iron beneath the velvet. The brandy was poured. Poirot declined. He wished his little grey cells undimmed. The level in Sir Reginald's glass fell with alarming speed. Colonel Harrington leaned forward, face flushed. "Reggie, old man, about that business with the estate. Not tonight, Bertie." Sir Reginald's voice cut like a blade. "But the solicitors said—" "I said not tonight." Silence crashed down. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Sir Reginald rose abruptly. "Ladies will be waiting, shall we?" In the drawing-room, coffee was served in Sèvres cups so thin they were almost transparent. A gramophone played carols. Bing Crosby crooned about white Christmases, with transatlantic cheer that felt obscene in this ancient room. Poirot found himself beside Miss Graves on a sofa near the fire. She was twisting a handkerchief into knots. "You wish to speak with me, mademoiselle?" She glanced around. No one was watching. "Not here. Tomorrow, perhaps?" "Tomorrow may be too late," Poirot said gently. "Courage." She swallowed. "It's about Sir Reginald's will, and something that happened in 1917. If he dies—" At that moment, the great windows rattled as though a giant hand had shaken them. The lights flickered, dimmed, brightened again. "Storm's worsening," someone muttered. Clarissa clapped her hands. "Charades! We must have charades before bed. It is tradition." The company arranged itself into two teams with the weary obedience of soldiers falling in for parade. Poirot excused himself on grounds of fatigue. A lie, he never tired when human nature was on display, and stationed himself by the fireplace, ostensibly warming his hands. Diana and Geoffrey acted out the 12 days of Christmas with increasing hysteria. Aunt Felicity guessed 11 pipers piping after the third mime and beamed triumphantly. The Reverend Whitcomb's impression of 5 golden rings involved an alarming amount of hip movement that made Clarissa laugh until tears stood in her eyes. Yet beneath the laughter, Poirot felt the tension coil tighter. Geoffrey's eyes kept straying to his father. Miles Ashford watched Geoffrey. Miss Graves watched the clock. Sir Reginald stood apart by the window, staring out at the storm as though it were an enemy army. At 11:30, the game collapsed into yawning and excuses. Guests drifted toward the staircase. Poirot lingered, adjusting a cushion that needed no adjustment. Sir Reginald approached, brandy glass empty now. "Thank you for coming, Poirot. I know it was damnably short notice. You feared for your life, monsieur." A muscle jumped in Sir Reginald's cheek. "I fear for my family's future. There are pressures, old debts, new ambitions. If anything should happen to me—" He broke off as Clarissa appeared at his elbow, radiant and brittle. "Darling, you'll frighten our guest. Monsieur Poirot, your hot water bottle has been warmed twice. Yorkshire nights are treacherous." Sir Reginald forced a smile. "Quite right. Good night, Poirot. Sleep well." The great house settled into stillness, broken only by the wind. Poirot climbed the stairs slowly, pausing on the landing. From the corridor above came the faint sound of a door closing, then another. Footsteps, light and quick. Someone moving who did not wish to be heard. In his room, the fire had burned low. Poirot added coal with methodical care, then opened his notebook. He wrote, "Sir R. drinks heavily, yet not a drunkard. Fear, guilt, Geoffrey, anger barely contained. Money, Diana, watches her brother with concern, her father with something colder. Miss Graves, terrified, of discovery or of violence. Reverend Whitcomb, too beautiful, too calm. Always the clergy hide something. Will of 1917 mentioned. War secret, house isolated. No escape until snow clears, perhaps days." He closed the book, placed it precisely beside the bed, and prepared for sleep. Yet, as he turned out the light, he noticed something that had not been there before. On the pillow lay a single sprig of holly, berries blood-red against the linen. No servant had entered since he descended to dinner. Poirot picked it up between gloved fingers. He always slept in gloves when travelling, and examined it beneath the bedside lamp. One berry had been crushed. The juice left a dark stain like a tiny wound. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to strike 12. The wind howled in answer. Poirot placed the holly carefully inside his notebook, between pages marked "Evidence." "Joyeux Noël," he whispered to the darkness. "Let the comedy begin." Chapter 3. The Midnight Toast and Sudden Shadow. The great clock in the entrance hall had a voice like a cathedral bell. At 3 minutes to midnight, it began its slow, deliberate chime, each stroke rolling through the house like a warning from the past. The Harringtons and their guests had gathered in the long gallery for the traditional Christmas toast. 2 footmen had carried in a silver punch bowl the size of a baptismal font, steaming gently with bishop, claret, port, roasted oranges, and enough cloves to wake the dead. Sir Reginald stood at the head of the room, glass raised, face flushed with wine and something fiercer. "To family," he declared, voice ringing against the oak beams. "To forgiveness, and to secrets that die with the old year." A strange toast. Poirot noted the way several glasses hesitated on their way to lips. Clarissa Harrington laughed, high and glittering. "Really, darling, you sound positively Gothic. It's Christmas." "Christmas," Sir Reginald repeated, almost savagely, "is when we pretend the past no longer matters. Drink." They drank. Poirot sipped his arrack punch and watched. Geoffrey's hand trembled. Diana's eyes were bright with unshed tears or anger. Miss Graves stood as far from the bowl as courtesy allowed, both hands clasped behind her back as though afraid to touch anything. The Reverend Whitcomb's beautiful face was unreadable, but his fingers stroked the stem of his glass in slow, hypnotic circles. The clock began the final sequence. 10, 11, 12. At the 12th stroke, Sir Reginald lifted his glass again. "To midnight!" he cried. "To—" The lights went out. Not a flicker, not a dimming. Complete, absolute darkness, as though the house had been plunged to the bottom of a mine. A woman screamed. Clarissa, Poirot thought, though the sound was rawer than her usual drawing-room shrieks. Glass shattered. Someone swore. Then came the crash of a body falling heavily. A single match flared. Colonel Harrington's brick-red face appeared, demonic in the tiny flame. "Stay where you are, damn it! Nobody move!" Another match. A candle was found and lit. Then another. The footman scrambled along the walls, touching flame to sconces. Light returned in reluctant pools. Sir Reginald Harrington lay on his back beside the punch table, one arm flung wide, the other clutching at his throat. His glass had smashed against the parquet. Dark liquid spread like blood across the polished oak. His eyes were open, staring at the painted ceiling where cherubs danced among vines. A thin line of foam, pinkish, edged his lips. Diana dropped to her knees beside him. "Papa!" The word tore out of her like something wild. Geoffrey stood frozen, glass still in hand, staring as though his father were a stranger. Poirot moved forward with the neat economy that always surprised those who thought small men must be slow. He knelt, touched 2 fingers to Sir Reginald's neck, then lifted one eyelid. The pupil was a pinprick. "Dead," he said quietly. "Not 5 seconds ago." Clarissa Harrington made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Poison," she whispered. "He's been poisoned." The word detonated. Colonel Harrington bellowed, "Lock the doors! Nobody leaves this room!" Miles Ashford was already at the main doors, turning the key with shaking fingers. The smaller door to the servants' corridor was bolted from the inside. Snowridge Manor, already a prison of weather, had become a cage. Poirot rose. "Madame," he addressed Clarissa, "you are certain it is poison?" I saw his face change, just before the lights." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Reginald took digitalis for his heart. The taste is bitter, but in sweet wine. Someone could have added, 'Enough!'" Poirot's voice cut like a whip. The room stilled. Even the eyes shut. Wind outside seemed to pause. He looked slowly around the circle of candlelit faces. Shock, terror, calculation, guilt. All the usual masks worn by people who had known this might happen. "Listen to me," he said, calm and terrible. "A man is dead. The house is isolated. The telephone wires are down. The roads impassable. There is no police, no doctor, no authority but myself. Until the snow stops and the world returns, Hercule Poirot is the law." He let that settle. Now, who was standing closest to Sir Reginald when the lights failed? A long silence. Then Miss Graves spoke, so softly they had to strain to hear. I was." Every head turned. The governess had gone the colour of candle wax. "I was beside the punch bowl," she continued, voice trembling. "Sir Reginald asked me to pass him the ladle. He joked that I had a steady hand. Then the lights went out, and he made a sound, like a cough that couldn't get out." Poirot's eyes never left her face. "And your hand, mademoiselle? Was it steady enough to drop something into his glass while the room was dark?" She flinched as though struck. "No, I swear." Geoffrey Harrington laughed, a cracked, ugly sound. "Of course, the little mouse who's been creeping about the house for months. How much did he promise you in the new will, Miss Graves? Or were you just tired of being invisible?" "Geoffrey!" Diana's voice cracked across the room. "Stop it!" But the damage was done. Miss Graves shrank back against the panelling, eyes huge. Poirot raised a hand. "Accusations later, facts now." He turned to the footman. "You, when the lights went out, where were you?" The elder footman swallowed. "By the service door, sir, waiting for the signal to bring in the champagne." "And the fuse box, where is it?" "Cellar, sir, but the main switch is in the butler's pantry. Both locked. Mr. Briggs has the only keys." The butler, Briggs, stood pale and rigid by the fireplace. "I have not left this room since 11 o'clock, sir. On my oath." Poirot nodded once. "Bien. Then we have a murder committed in full view of 12 people, in darkness that lasted perhaps 8 seconds. The poison, digitalis you say, madame, acts quickly. That means it was added to Sir Reginald's glass, either immediately before the toast or during the darkness." He bent again beside the body, careful not to disturb it further. From his waistcoat pocket he produced a small torch, a recent gift from Inspector Japp, much mocked at the time. The thin beam swept the floor. Near Sir Reginald's outstretched right hand lay a single crimson berry, glossy as fresh blood. "Holly," Poirot picked it up with a handkerchief. "Curious," he murmured. "One does not usually find holly berries in Bishop." Diana gave a choked cry. "That's from the garland above the punch bowl. Someone tore it down in the dark." Indeed, the rope of holly and ivy that had hung festively above the table now dangled, one end trailing on the floor like a broken necklace. The Reverend Whitcomb spoke for the first time, voice soft. Perhaps Sir Reginald clutched at it as he fell. "Perhaps," Poirot echoed. "Or perhaps the murderer brushed against it while leaning close in the darkness. A small thing, but murderers, like the rest of us, are creatures of habit. They leave traces." He straightened. "Now, no one will leave this room until I have examined the body and the punch bowl. Briggs, have blankets brought. We will keep Sir Reginald here until morning. It is not respectful, but it is necessary." Clarissa Harrington swayed. Aunt Felicity's knitting needles began clicking again, rapid as machine-gun fire. Outside, the storm redoubled its fury, rattling the tall windows like a living thing demanding entrance. Poirot looked at the clock. 12:08. Christmas Day had begun with a corpse. Chapter 4. Interrogations by the Firelight. The long gallery had become a tribunal. 2 branch candelabra and the great fireplace now supplied the only light. The electric chandelier lay dead above them like a murdered star. Sir Reginald's body had been covered with a velvet pall from the billiard-room, and laid along the window-seat, his profile sharp beneath the cloth. No one looked in that direction if they could help it. Poirot had taken possession of a small walnut writing desk near the fire. On it lay his open notebook, a silver propelling pencil, and the single crushed hollyberry sealed inside a clean handkerchief. The guests sat in a ragged semicircle on sofas and straight-backed chairs, wrapped in shawls and hostility. The temperature had dropped sharply since the electricity failed. Breath plumed in the air. Briggs and the 2 footmen stood behind Poirot, like silent ushers at a funeral. Outside, the wind moaned in the chimneys and hurled handfuls of snow against the panes. Poirot did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "We will proceed in order," he said, consulting his list with theatrical calm. "One by one you will come to me. You will speak the truth, or you will regret the lie. The snow keeps our secrets tonight, but snow melts. Remember that." He looked up. "Lady Harrington, you first." Clarissa Harrington rose as though the chair had become hot. She had changed into a black dressing gown of heavy silk. The diamonds were gone, but the poise remained. She sat opposite Poirot, hands folded, chin high. "Your husband feared poison?" Poirot began without preamble. "He feared many things lately." Her voice was steady, almost amused. "Debts, scandal, his children's ingratitude, take your pick. Digitalis, he took it for his heart. A few drops in water every evening. The bottle is in his dressing-room. Anyone in the house could have obtained it." "Including yourself?" Clarissa smiled thinly. "Including myself, but I did not. I have no need of inheritance. I brought most of the money into this marriage. And I loved him, Monsieur Poirot, in the way one loves a difficult, brilliant, impossible man." Poirot inclined his head, neither believing nor disbelieving. "Where exactly were you when the lights failed?" "Beside the punch bowl, on Sir Reginald's left. Diana was on his right. Miss Graves stood behind him, ready to serve. Thank you, madame. You may return." She rose with fluid grace and walked back to her chair as though crossing a stage. Next, Geoffrey Harrington. The young man approached with the sullen swagger of someone who has been sent to the headmaster too often. He dropped into the chair and immediately lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. "You quarrelled with your father at dinner," Poirot said. "We always quarrelled. He thought I was a wastrel. He was probably right." "He planned to change his will?" Geoffrey exhaled smoke through his nose. "He threatened to every month. Cut me off. Leave everything to some cat's home. Marry again and breed a better son. The usual parental serenade. Tonight he opened the 76 brandy. A last bottle. Was that significant?" "It was worth £200, Geoffrey said bitterly. "He drank it like water. Said he wouldn't need money where he was going." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "He spoke of dying. He spoke of endings. I thought he was drunk. Were you near him when the lights went out?" "I was across the room. Ask anyone. I am asking you." Geoffrey met his gaze for the first time. "I never touched him. God help me. I wanted to sometimes, but not like that." Poirot dismissed him with a flick of the pencil. Diana Harrington came next. She had been crying, but the tears were dry now, leaving salt tracks on powdered cheeks. "Mademoiselle, you loved your father." "More than anyone in this room," she flashed. "He was cruel sometimes, but he was alive. Now he's that." She jerked her head toward the window seat. "You stood at his right hand during the toast?" "Yes. I remember his sleeve brushing mine. Then darkness, and his glass falling. He clutched at me, here." She touched her forearm. "His fingers dug in so hard I'll have bruises tomorrow." Poirot noted it down. "Did you see or feel anyone else near him in the darkness?" "Only Miss Graves behind us, and there was a smell, bitter almonds almost, but the punch was spiced. I thought I imagined it." "Prussic acid has that scent," Poirot murmured. "Yet you mentioned digitalis." Diana looked suddenly very young. "I don't know what killed him. I only know he's dead, and everyone in this house had reason." She left before Poirot could stop her. Colonel Harrington blustered through his interview. Alibis, army training, refusal to believe poison, damned unsporting. His wife Evelyn twittered about headaches and smelling salts. Aunt Felicity was deaf and furious at being woken. She answered every question with "Speak up," and went back to her knitting. Miles Ashford was smooth, almost enjoying himself. "I'm only a cousin by marriage," he said, smiling. "No possible motive. I was admiring the Romney portrait when the lights failed. Ask the Reverend, he was beside me." The Reverend David Whitcomb confirmed it in a voice as musical as Planchon. He had noticed nothing unusual, regretted everything deeply, and offered to pray for the soul of the departed. Poirot watched his beautiful, tranquil face, and felt the little bells of suspicion ring softly. At last only one remained. Miss Graves approached as though walking to the scaffold. She wore the same grey wool dress she had worn at dinner. Her hair had come partly unpinned and hung in pale strands about her face. She sat, hands knotted in her lap, and stared at the carpet. "Name?" Poirot asked gently. "Helen Graves." The voice was barely audible. "You have been governess here how long?" "Since Diana was 12, 13 years. Yet you are not much older than she is now." "I was 16 when I came." Poirot leaned forward. "Earlier this evening you wished to speak with me urgently. About Sir Reginald's will and something in 1917. The time for secrets is over, mademoiselle." She raised her head. Her eyes were dry but red-rimmed. "In 1917 I was 4 years old," she said. "My mother worked as a typist at the War Office. She had an affair with a married officer." When she discovered she was with child, he paid her to disappear. That officer was Captain Reginald Harrington. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Clarissa Harrington went very still. Helen Graves continued, voice gaining strength. My mother died when I was 10. Sir Reginald traced me, brought me here as governess, so he could keep me close without scandal. He was not cruel, only distant. Last month he told me he intended to acknowledge me in a new will. A proper settlement. Geoffrey would have received less. Diana, nothing extra. Lady Harrington— She stopped. Continue, Poirot said. Lady Harrington found the draft. There was a terrible row. She said bastards should stay in the gutter where they belonged. Clarissa's voice cut across the room like a shard of ice. I said no such thing. Helen ignored her. Tonight, just before the toast, Sir Reginald took me aside. He said, after midnight, everything changes, Helen. Be brave. Then he drank and— She broke off, pressing both hands to her mouth. Poirot waited until the silence became unbearable. So, he said at last, we have motive in abundance. A fortune redistributed, old shames exposed, new shames created, and opportunity, 8 seconds of perfect darkness. He closed his notebook with a soft snap. One thing more, the electricity. Briggs informs me the main fuse box is in the cellar behind a locked iron door. The key hangs in the butler's pantry, in full view of the servants' hall all evening. Yet someone contrived to throw the switch at the exact moment of the toast. He looked around the circle of pale, defiant, terrified faces. Someone in this room planned murder to the second, and someone else perhaps knows who it was. The fire settled with a sudden crash of coals. Sparks flew up the chimney like souls escaping. Poirot rose. It is nearly 3 o'clock. We are all exhausted. Briggs will lock the long gallery from the outside. We remain together until daylight. No one is to sleep too soundly. Colonel Harrington muttered something about British justice. Poirot ignored him. As the others arranged themselves on sofas and chairs, pulling blankets around their shoulders, Poirot returned to the writing desk and added 3 lines to his notebook. Digitalis or cyanide? Must examine the glass. The holly berry, deliberate signature or accident? Helen Graves, victim or accomplice? He underlined the last line twice. From the window seat came the faint, unmistakable sound of melting snow dripping from the velvet pall onto the floor beneath. Drip, 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 like a clock counting down to the next death. Chapter 5. Secrets in the Attic. At 6:30 on Christmas morning, the house was still dark, but a pale, corpse-coloured light seeped through the high windows of the long gallery. The storm had spent itself. Snow now fell in slow, deliberate flakes, as though the sky itself were reluctant to bury the events of the night. No one had truly slept. People lay wrapped in blankets like survivors of a shipwreck, eyes open, listening to the house creak and settle around a dead man. Poirot had not closed his eyes for more than 5 minutes at a time. He had spent the small hours moving silently among the sleepers, noting who breathed evenly, who twitched at every sound, who wept without noise. At 5 o'clock he had slipped out. Briggs, exhausted, had dozed against the locked door, and returned 20 minutes later, with snow on his shoes and satisfaction in his eyes. Now he stood at the fireplace, ringing a small handbell he had found on the mantel. The sound cut through the stupor like a knife. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "the inquest begins. Breakfast will be served in the dining room in 30 minutes. After that, no one will leave the ground floor until I permit it. Briggs, the keys." The butler, grey-faced, handed over the great ring. Poirot selected one heavy iron key and held it up, The attic, it is time!" A ripple of unease. Diana Harrington sat up, hair tangled, eyes swollen. The attic. Why? Because, mademoiselle, the dead speak most clearly in places they believed forgotten. He would take only one companion. After a moment's consideration, he chose Helen Graves. She alone had nothing left to hide, and her trembling curiosity might prove useful. They left the others under the watchful eye of Colonel Harrington, who had appointed himself temporary custodian of order, and climbed the main staircase, then a narrower flight hidden behind a tapestry of Perseus slaying the dragon. The attic key turned with a shriek of rust. Cold struck them like a slap. The attic stretched the full length of the house, a cavern of shadows and deeper shadows. Snow sifted through a broken pane high in the gable, laying a white path across blackened beams. Trunks, crates, suitcases, rolled carpets, and discarded furniture stood in accusing silence, draped in dust sheets that looked disturbingly like shrouds. Helen hugged herself. "I haven't been up here since I was a child. Sir Reginald kept it locked." "Yet someone has been here recently," Poirot said. He pointed his torch at the floor. In the thick dust, footprints, small, neat, a woman's shoe, led from the door to a far corner and back again. Twice. They followed the trail. The corner held a leather travelling trunk bound with brass, the initials RH stenciled in faded gold. The lock had been forced long ago. The hasp hung loose. Poirot lifted the lid. Inside lay the relics of a younger man's war. A Sam Brown belt, polished to glass. A Webley revolver in an open holster. A folded Union Jack no larger than a handkerchief, stained rust brown in one corner. A packet of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. And on top, carefully placed as though for a museum, a silver cigarette case engraved to Reggie, with all my love. See Christmas 1914. Helen's breath caught. That was my mother's ribbon. She kept her letters in blue. Poirot lifted the packet with reverence. The top envelope was addressed in a round girlish hand. Captain R. Harrington, 2nd Battalion, somewhere in France. Postmark, 17th of March, 1917. He opened it carefully. The paper crackled like dry leaves. My dearest Reggie, I am writing this in the typing pool while the others are at lunch. I still cannot believe what you asked of me yesterday. To destroy the casualty lists, to change the dates, to make it seem your battalion was elsewhere when the gas came. If it is discovered, I will be imprisoned for treason. Yet you say lives depend on it. Your life, you said. I love you too much to refuse. God forgive me, there is something else. I missed my monthly. I think I am with child. Please, Reggie, when you come home on leave, we must speak. I will wait for you always. Your Ellen Poirot turned to the next letter. Dated 3 weeks later, the handwriting frantic. They have found out. Colonel Masterson came to the office himself. He did not shout. He simply looked at me as though I were dirt. I have been dismissed without references. I have nowhere to go. Reggie, I am so frightened. The final letter was a single sheet, blotched with tears. The baby kicked today. I have named her Helen, after my mother. I will manage somehow. But know this, if you abandon us both, I will not be silent forever. Poirot folded the letters and replaced them exactly as he had, found them. So, he said softly, blackmail. Not once, but twice across 20 years. First the forgery that saved a reputation, perhaps a court-martial. Then the child herself kept close, paid for, controlled. Sir Reginald lived in terror that one day the price would become too high. Helen Graves was crying without sound. He was going to make it right. He promised. Promises, Poirot said, are cheap. Reputations are not. He lifted the cigarette case. Inside, instead of cigarettes, lay a small stoppered bottle of colourless liquid and a typed sheet folded many times. The bottle bore a faded label, Tincture of Digitalis. 1 in 100. The typed sheet was a draft codicil to Sir Reginald's will, dated 3 weeks ago. To my natural daughter Helen Graves, spinster, at present residing at Snowridge Manor. I bequeath the sum of £50,000 free of duty and the freehold of Laurel Cottage, Little Budworth, Cheshire. £50,000 in 1936 was a fortune that could buy silence or screaming headlines depending on temperament. Poirot closed the trunk. Someone knew this was here. Someone forced the lock recently. See, the splintered wood is fresh. Someone photographed these documents, perhaps, or simply waited for the new will to be signed. Helen wiped her eyes. Lady Harrington, or Master Geoffrey, who stood to lose the most, or another who believed the past should stay buried. They were turning to leave when Poirot's torch swept across something half-hidden beneath a nearby crate. A small, cheap Kodak camera on a wooden tripod pointed toward the trunk. A length of black cord ran from the shutter to the door, 20 feet of it, carefully coiled. "Tiens!" Poirot exclaimed. "A trap for the curious. Someone wished to know who came looking." He followed the cord. It disappeared through a knothole in the floorboards directly above the second-floor corridor, above the very linen cupboard, outside Sir Reginald's bedroom, in fact. Someone sat in the dark cupboard, Poirot murmured, waiting for footsteps overhead. When the attic door opened, they pulled the cord and took a photograph by flash. Clever and patient. Helen stared at the camera as though it were a snake. Who? That, ma petite, is what we now ascertain. They descended. In the corridor below, Poirot opened the linen cupboard. Dust lay thick, but in the centre of the floor, a perfect rectangle was clean. Someone had sat there recently, for hours perhaps. On a shelf lay a used flashbulb and a single developed photograph. It showed Helen Graves herself, standing beside the open trunk, holding the bundle of letters. The picture had been taken yesterday afternoon, judging by the light. Helen made a small, wounded sound. "Blackmail again," Poirot said grimly. "The murderer wished to discredit you before you could be acknowledged, or perhaps to drive you to despair." He slipped the photograph into his pocket. As they reached the landing, the breakfast gong sounded, deep, mournful, absurdly normal. From the hall below came the smell of coffee and bacon, and the low mutter of voices, trying to pretend this was an ordinary Christmas. Poirot paused at the head of the stairs. "One more thing, mademoiselle. Last night you said Sir Reginald whispered to you before the toast. What exactly were his words?" Helen closed her eyes, remembering. "He said, 'After midnight, everything changes, Helen. Be brave.' And then, very softly, 'Forgive me for the attic.'" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sure sign of excitement restrained. "Forgive him for the attic," he repeated, which means he knew someone had discovered his secret. He believed the danger came from up there. He looked upward, toward the dark staircase they had just descended. Someone in this house has been playing a longer game than even Hercule Poirot suspected. But the pieces are beginning to arrange themselves, n'est-ce pas? Far above them, in the freezing attic, the broken window let in another gust of wind. The dust sheet over a suit of armour billowed like a ghost trying to escape its past. Chapter 6. The Alibi of the Governess. The breakfast room felt like a stage set after the actors have gone home. Bacon congealed under silver covers. Toast grew cold in regiments. Coffee steamed for no one. The family and guests sat in a loose circle around the table. as though waiting for the curtain to rise on the next act of a tragedy they had not yet learned by heart. Poirot entered without ceremony, Helen Graves 2 steps behind him like a pale shadow. In his hand he carried the Kodak photograph and the developed plate still smelling faintly of fixer. He laid both on the damask cloth as calmly as a conjurer producing a rabbit. "Regardez," he said, "Christmas morning, and Father Christmas has brought proof." Every face turned. Helen Graves flushed scarlet. Geoffrey Harrington half rose from his chair, then thought better of it. Poirot tapped the photograph. "Taken yesterday afternoon at 4:12 precisely. See the shadow on the trunk. Mademoiselle Graves is holding the letters that prove her parentage. Someone wished to capture her in the act of prying, perhaps to discredit her claim before the new will could be signed." Clarissa Harrington's teacup rattled in its saucer. "How vulgar! Who would stoop to such a thing?" "That, madame, is what we now establish." Poirot's gaze swept the table. "But first, an alibi must be broken." He turned to Helen. "Last night you told us you were behind Sir Reginald, ready to ladle punch when the lights failed. Yet several people insist you moved." Lady Harrington felt a sleeve brush her arm. "Your sleeve, she believes." Miss Diana felt fingers clutch her wrist in the darkness. Fingers she now says were too delicate for her father's. "Explain." Helen's hands twisted together until the knuckles blanched. I did move, only for a second. Sir Reginald dropped his glass just before the lights went out. I bent to retrieve it. When darkness came, I was still crouching. That is why no one saw me at my post." A lie so thin it was almost insulting. Poirot sighed the sigh of a man whose patience is a renewable but not infinite resource. "Mademoiselle, the parquet floor in the long gallery is waxed to the slipperiness of ice. A glass dropped from shoulder height would have shattered instantly. Yet Sir Reginald's glass was found intact beside his body, only spilled, not broken. Therefore, he did not drop it before the darkness. He let it fall as the poison took hold. Your story collapses." Helen swayed. The Reverend Whitcomb rose quickly and guided her to a chair. She sat as though her bones had turned to water. Poirot continued, relentless but not unkind. "Furthermore, the holly garland above the punch bowl was torn down in the dark. The lowest sprig hung 6 feet from the floor. You are 5'3", mademoiselle. Even on tiptoe you could not have reached it without standing on something. There was nothing to stand on. Yet a single berry was found beside the body. Someone wished us to think you had torn the garland in panic or malice. Someone who knew you would be blamed." He produced the crushed berry sealed in its handkerchief, like a prosecutor unveiling Exhibit A. Helen found her voice. "I didn't kill him. He was going to acknowledge me. Why would I?" "Exactly," Poirot interrupted. "Why would you? But someone wished the world to believe you had every reason. Someone who photographed you in the attic, who set the camera trap, who perhaps even slipped the digitalis into the punch, and then, in the darkness, pressed the poisoned glass into Sir Reginald's hand, while brushing deliberately against the holly, so that a berry would fall near your feet." Silence, thick as the snow outside. Poirot turned to the table at large. "Now we eliminate. Who knew of the attic camera? Who had opportunity to tamper with the punch between the drawing-room charades and the midnight toast?" He began to count on his fingers. Lady Harrington left the drawing-room at 11:15, ostensibly for aspirin. She was gone 7 minutes. Master Geoffrey visited the cloakroom at 11:20, and was absent nearly 10 minutes. Mr. Miles Ashford stepped onto the terrace for air at 11:25. The footman saw him return with snow on his shoes. The Reverend Whitcomb disappeared to the library to fetch a book of carols and returned humming In Dulci Jubilo. Miss Diana walked to the conservatory to cut fresh mistletoe, alone. Colonel and Mrs. Harrington remained in plain sight the entire time, arguing about the wireless. Aunt Felicity knitted without cease. Briggs and the footman were in and out with trays. He let the catalogue settle. 5 suspects with opportunity, 1 with genius. Clarissa gave a brittle laugh. Really, Monsieur Poirot, this is absurd. Are we to believe some master criminal crept about with a tripod and flash powder? No, madam. I believe a member of this household used the tools at hand, and I believe Mademoiselle Graves can tell us whose hand that was. All eyes returned to Helen. She was staring at the photograph as though it might bite her. Helen, Poirot said softly, the time for fear is finished. Your father is dead. Only the truth can protect you now. She lifted her head. Tears trembled on her lashes, but did not fall. It was Geoffrey, she whispered. He showed me the photograph yesterday evening. Said if I didn't leave the house before the new will was read, he would send copies to the newspapers. Bastard governess steals inheritance. He had already prepared the envelopes. Geoffrey Harrington surged to his feet, face livid. Liar! You poisonous little— Sit down! Colonel Harrington's parade ground roar cracked across the room. Geoffrey sat. Helen continued, voice steadier now. He told me he had watched me go to the attic twice. The second time he followed and set the camera while I was in the trunk. He said father was weak, that the estate would be ruined paying me off, that I had to disappear or be destroyed. And the poison? Poirot prompted. I don't know. I only know that after he threatened me, I went to Sir Reginald in the library. I begged him to send me away with a small allowance, anything to avoid scandal. He refused. He said, tomorrow I will tell them all myself. At breakfast, you will take your proper place. He was happy about it, almost reckless. Diana made a small sound of anguish. Poirot nodded slowly. So, Sir Reginald intended public acknowledgement on Christmas morning. That announcement would have ruined several futures in this room. The murderer could not wait another 8 hours. He turned to Geoffrey. Monsieur, you have no alibi for the crucial minutes. You hated the idea of sharing your inheritance with a half-sister you considered an embarrassment. You prepared blackmail. Did you also prepare murder? Geoffrey's smile was thin and dangerous. Prove it, little man. Poirot's eyes glittered. I shall. He reached into his pocket and produced something that made the entire table gasp. A tiny glass vial, empty, bearing the same faded label as the one in the attic trunk. Tincture of digitalis. I found this, Poirot said, in the pocket of the dinner jacket you wore last night, monsieur. It is still damp with punch. You slipped it there when you returned from the cloakroom, planning to dispose of it later. But the darkness came sooner than you expected, no? Geoffrey stared at the bottle as though it were a scorpion. Clarissa Harrington rose slowly. Geoffrey? Her voice was barely breath. Tell me he's lying. Geoffrey said nothing. The silence stretched until Aunt Felicity's knitting needles clicked once, twice, like a gallows dropping. Poirot allowed himself the smallest sigh of satisfaction. The alibi of the governess was never the question, he said quietly. It was the perfect frame. But even the most careful murderer forgets one thing. Hercule Poirot does not like framed pictures. He prefers the truth, however ugly. Outside, the snow had stopped entirely. A pale Christmas sun struggled over the horizon, turning the world to bruised pearl. In the breakfast room, no one moved. The trial, Poirot reflected, had only just begun. Chapter 7. Footprints in the Snow. The accusation hung in the breakfast room like frost that refused to melt. Geoffrey Harrington sat white-lipped, staring at the empty digitalis bottle as though it were a loaded revolver. The others watched him with the wary fascination people reserve for a wild animal that has suddenly been caged. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch until it became unbearable, then broke it with the mildness of a surgeon choosing the exact spot for the knife. "However," he said, "there is a difficulty." Every head turned. "The file I hold is indeed empty. It did indeed contain digitalis, but it was not found in Monsieur Geoffrey's pocket. It was found 20 minutes ago in the snow beneath the library window, thrown there, one presumes, by someone who believed the drifts would hide it until spring." He placed the bottle carefully beside the photograph, a second exhibit. Geoffrey gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Then you have nothing." "Au contraire," Poirot replied. "I have everything, because the bottle did not walk to the flower bed by itself. Someone opened a window after the murder, leaned out, and discarded it. Yet every window on the ground floor was found fastened this morning. Briggs himself checked them at my request. That leaves only one possibility." He crossed to the tall sash window of the breakfast room and threw it open. A blade of icy air cut across the table. Outside, the snow lay untouched except for one set of footprints. Deep, deliberate, leading from the house to the exact spot beneath the library window and back again. "Observe," Poirot said, "a single excursion, made after the storm eased, perhaps 3 o'clock this morning. The tracks are narrow, a woman's shoe or a small man's. They begin at the garden door, pass beneath the library and return. Whoever made them wore galoshes 2 sizes too large in an attempt to disguise the print. A clever touch, but not clever enough." He closed the window and turned back to the room. "Briggs, the galoshes from the boot room, if you please." The butler, moving like a man in a dream, left and returned with a pair of enormous black rubber overshoes. The left one carried a distinctive V-shaped nick in the heel. Poirot held them up. "These were taken from the rack at 2:30 this morning. They are still wet inside, and look, here is the same V." You had placed one galoche beside the plaster cast he had made of the deepest print. The match was perfect. Clarissa Harrington rose so quickly her chair toppled. "Those are the servants' galoshes. Anyone could have—" "No, madame," Poirot interrupted gently. "The servants sleep in the east wing. To reach the boot room, they would have passed Briggs's pantry, where he sat on guard with a shotgun across his knees. He saw no one. These galoshes were taken from the family side of the green baize door, and returned." He let that settle. Diana Harrington spoke for the first time since breakfast began, her voice raw. "Then it wasn't Geoffrey." "Not necessarily," Poirot said. "A loving sister, perhaps, removing evidence for a beloved brother, or a wife protecting the family name, or an accomplice tidying up loose ends." He moved to the fireplace and rang the bell. When Briggs appeared, Poirot gave crisp orders. "All outdoor shoes, boots, and galoshes belonging to the ladies and gentlemen are to be brought here immediately. We will try them for size inside these cunning overshoes. The owner will be illuminated." 10 minutes later, the breakfast table looked like a cobbler's shop after an earthquake. Riding boots, evening shoes, fur-lined boots, even Aunt Felicity's carpet slippers lay in accusing rows. Poirot worked methodically. One by one the guests were required to stand, while Briggs held the oversized galoche against their stockinged foot. Colonel Harrington, too large. Miles Ashford, almost, but the instep too high. Reverend Whitcomb, A perfect fit. The clergyman looked down at his own elegant black shoes sliding neatly into the rubber casing, as though it had been waiting for this moment all night. "Dear me," he said mildly, "how very awkward." A collective gasp rippled around the table. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You will perhaps explain, Monsieur l'Abbé, why a man of peace trudges through the snow at 3 a.m. disposing of poison bottles?" David Whitcomb smiled. The same serene smile he had worn while leading midnight mass in his parish church last year. "I should be delighted to explain," he said, "if you will permit me a small demonstration." He reached into the pocket of his clerical waistcoat and drew out a silver hip flask. Unscrewing the top, he poured a measure of amber liquid into a coffee cup and offered it to Poirot. "Brandy, the 76 in fact, Sir Reginald's last bottle. I helped myself after you locked us in the long gallery. Medicinal, you understand." Poirot took the cup but did not drink. Whitcomb continued, voice as beautiful and treacherous as running water. "You are quite right about the footprints. I made them, but not to discard evidence, to retrieve it. When the lights failed, I was standing beside Miles Ashford near the Romney portrait, exactly as I told you. In the darkness, I felt someone press this flask into my hand with a whispered instruction, 'Hold this until I return.' A moment later the lights came on, and Sir Reginald was dying. The person never came back. I thought it prudent to discover what I had been given." He took the flask back from Poirot and tipped it. Instead of brandy, a small stoppered glass tube slid out into his palm, identical to the one found in the snow, but still containing a few drops of clear liquid. "I went outside at 3, Whitcomb continued, because I feared the real murderer intended to retrieve it from me and plant it somewhere incriminating. My room, perhaps. I threw the tube into the snow where it would be found cleanly, without fingerprints. Then I waited to see who would panic." He looked around the table with gentle regret. "I am sorry to have borrowed the galoshes. They were the only ones large enough to fit over my shoes without splitting." Poirot took the second tube, held it to the light, and nodded slowly. "Digitalis again. Enough for 2 murders, perhaps. You are a cool one, Reverend, but you have just destroyed your own alibi. You admit handling poison." "Handling, yes. Administering, no." Whitcomb's eyes were steady. "Someone chose me as a convenient postbox, because I am quiet, unobtrusive, and, let us be honest, because a clergyman is unlikely to be suspected of tasting the contents. I disappointed them." Clarissa Harrington laughed, a high cracking sound. "A priest playing detective! How perfectly grotesque!" "Better a priest playing detective," Whitcomb replied softly, "than a murderer playing penitent." The room seemed to contract around the words. Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Enough. We now have 2 identical bottles, one empty, one nearly so. We have footprints that lead nowhere except in circles. And we have a house full of people who wished Sir Reginald dead. Some for money, some for honour, some perhaps for love." He looked out at the snow-covered gardens, where the footprints ended at the library wall like a sentence without punctuation. "Someone in this room is very clever," he said, "but cleverness is like mistletoe. Beautiful, poisonous, and it always leaves berries behind." He turned back to the table. "Briggs, coffee for everyone. Strong. We are going outside. The snow has secrets it has not yet told us, and Hercule Poirot intends to read every line." The sun, weak and winter pale, climbed higher. Beneath it, the footprints waited, patient as graves. Chapter 8. The Christmas Morning Revelation. The party assembled on the terrace like reluctant pilgrims. The snow had stopped entirely. The world was a blank page waiting for footprints. At Poirot's insistence, every adult member of the household, family, guests, even Aunt Felicity bundled into a bath chair, was wrapped in coats and scarves and marched outside into the glittering cold. Briggs and the footman carried shovels and brooms as though preparing for a funeral procession. Poirot stood at the top of the stone steps, small and immaculate in his astrakhan-collared overcoat, Homburg hat pulled low, green gloves spotless. He looked, Diana thought bitterly, like a fastidious penguin presiding over chaos. "Observe," he began, voice carrying easily in the frozen air. "Here is the library window. Here are the footprints made by the Reverend Whitcomb at 3 o'clock. They go to this spot." He pointed with his cane, where the first poison bottle was found, and they return, perfectly symmetrical, too perfect. He turned to the group. Yet 20 feet to the left is something no one has mentioned. A second set of prints, shallower, almost lost beneath the later fall, but unmistakable to the trained eye. With a flourish, he indicated a line of faint indentations that ran from the garden door, curved beneath the yew hedge, and disappeared into the untouched snow of the rose garden. "These were made earlier, between midnight and 1 o'clock, I estimate. Someone left the house immediately after the murder, walked 30 yards, and vanished." Colonel Harrington snorted. "Vanished? Poppycock! Must have turned round? No." Poirot shook his head. "See how the snow is smooth beyond the last print? No return marks. Either our murderer grew wings, or he had an accomplice who swept the trail behind him." He gestured to the footman. They began to sweep in wide, careful arcs. Within moments, the bristles revealed what the snow had hidden. A narrow trench, no wider than a man's shoulders, leading straight to the old ice house half buried in the hillside. The padlock on the ice house door was new and gleamed against the ancient oak. It had been forced. The hasp hung loose. Inside, the air was black and bitingly cold. Blocks of ice from last winter still lined the walls, sweating gently. In the centre of the sawdust floor lay a single gentleman's patent leather evening shoe, size 9, right foot only. Geoffrey Harrington made a strangled sound. "That's mine! I thought I'd lost it in the dark last night." Poirot picked the shoe up with a silk handkerchief. Inside, the leather was still damp. "Lost, monsieur, or deliberately removed, so that when you walked back across the terrace in stockinged feet, you left no prints at all. Your accomplice waited here, swept the trail, and carried you, how do you say, piggyback, to the garden door." A clever variation on the no footprints problem. He turned to the company. "Now we understand the mechanics. One person poisons Sir Reginald. While we are all occupied with screams and candles, a second slips outside, prepares the ice house, and erases evidence. Then, at 3 o'clock, a third person, our good Reverend, innocently retrieves the bottle that was meant to disappear forever. 3 conspirators, or one very busy murderer, wearing different masks." Clarissa Harrington's face was the colour of parchment. "This is madness! Who would organise such a pantomime?" Poirot's smile was almost tender. "Someone who knew the house intimately. Someone who had rehearsed every step. Someone who understood that Hercule Poirot notices when footprints do not behave as footprints should." He produced from his pocket a small silver object. A lady's evening bag, beaded, old-fashioned. "Found inside the ice house, wedged behind an ice block. Monogram C.H. Lady Harrington, I believe this is yours?" Clarissa stared at it as though it were a scorpion. "I lost it weeks ago," she whispered. "Or you left it deliberately, so that when the time came, you could claim it had been stolen to incriminate you. A double bluff. But the beads are stained with digitalis, madame. The bottle leaked." He opened the clasp. Inside lay a folded sheet of Harrington-crested notepaper. Poirot read aloud. "If anything happens to me, give this to the police. Reginald has discovered everything. The forged War Office papers, the child, the payments. He intends to confess publicly on Christmas Day and disinherit us all. There is only one way to stop him. Meet me in the library at 11:45. Come alone." C. Clarissa swayed. Miles Ashford caught her elbow. "My handwriting," she said faintly, "but I never wrote that." "No," Poirot agreed. "You did not. It is a forgery. Good, but not perfect. See the loop of the Y, the pressure of the pen. Someone studied your hand and practiced." He looked slowly around the circle. Now the picture becomes clear. Sir Reginald intended confession and restitution. Someone forged this note to lure him to the library early, perhaps to reason, perhaps to threaten. When that failed, poison was added to the punch, easy, since everyone knew he drank more than was good for him. The lights were arranged to fail at the exact moment of the toast, a simple matter of loosening the main fuse earlier in the evening. In the darkness, the poisoned glass was pressed into Sir Reginald's hand, the holly berry planted to incriminate Miss Graves, the note left to incriminate Lady Harrington. Diana's voice cut across the cold air. "Who, Monsieur Poirot? For God's sake, who?" Poirot turned toward the house. High in the west gable, a window stood open. A figure was visible, small against the vast white roof. Aunt Felicity. She had escaped her bath chair and climbed the back stairs while everyone was occupied outside. Now she stood on the narrow parapet, scarlet knitting abandoned, arms spread like a gaudy bird about to take flight. "Felicity!" Colonel Harrington bellowed. "Come down at once!" The old woman's voice floated down, surprisingly strong. "Too late, Bertie, always too late. Reggie was going to drag us all through the courts. Cowardice, forgery, perjury, bastardy. I couldn't let him. The regiment, you understand, the name." She laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "I planned it all. The fuse, the note, the footprints. Miles helped. He needed his gambling debts paid. Clarissa knew nothing until it was done. I counted on her pride to keep silent." Miles Ashford took one involuntary step forward. "You mad old—" But Aunt Felicity was already climbing onto the very edge of the parapet, skirts billowing. "Merry Christmas, darlings!" she called. "See you in hell!" She jumped. There was no scream, only the soft final sound of snow accepting a body. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Diana began to cry, harsh, tearing sobs that sounded like something breaking inside her chest. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Thus," he said quietly, "ends the Christmas morning revelation. A confession no one wished to hear. From a murderer no one thought to suspect." He looked at the silent, shattered group. Sometimes the greatest crimes are committed by those who believe they are saving something. Honor, family, a regiment that no longer exists. But murder, mes amis, saves nothing. It only adds another ghost to the attic. Far above, the broken window gaped like an empty eye. Snow began to fall again, gently covering the scarlet splash on the whiteness below, as though the house itself wished to forget. Chapter 9. Twists of the Yuletide Tree. The house held its breath. Snowridge Manor, so lately a stage for screaming and accusation, now lay wrapped in a silence deeper than any midnight. Aunt Felicity's body had been carried to the old gun-room and covered with a Union Jack from the attic trunk. No one spoke her name. No one dared. They had returned to the drawing-room because no one knew where else to go. The great Christmas tree still glittered in the corner, candles unlit, presents heaped beneath it like offerings to a pagan god who had turned his face away. Poirot stood before the tree, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on something none of the others could see. "No," he said at last, so quietly that they all leaned forward to hear. "No, it is not finished." Clarissa Harrington gave a cracked laugh. "You have your murderer, monsieur. My husband's aunt has obligingly leapt to her death with a full confession. What more do you require? Blood on the carpet?" Poirot turned. His face was very pale, the moustache almost fierce. "I require the truth, madame, and the truth she is a lady who does not confess so easily." He moved to the tree and with delicate precision lifted a small parcel wrapped in gold paper and tied with scarlet ribbon. A tag, written in an old-fashioned hand, read, "To my dearest Reggie, open at midnight." Poirot held it up. "This was placed here yesterday, I am told, yet no one admits to bringing it down from the attic." Diana stared. "I thought father put it there himself. A surprise for us." "Perhaps," Poirot said. "Or perhaps someone wished Sir Reginald to open it at the exact moment the lights failed." He weighed the parcel in his gloved hand. It was heavier than its size suggested. "Briggs, a sharp knife, if you please." The butler produced a silver fruit knife. Poirot slit the paper with the reverence of a priest opening a reliquary. Inside was a small wooden box, mahogany, brass-bound. On the lid, carved in Gothic letters, R.H. 1916, Poirot opened it. Nestled on faded blue velvet lay a German Luger pistol, black and evil, and a single sheet of paper folded into a tight square. He unfolded the paper and read aloud. "My darling Reggie, if you are reading this, I am dead, and you have lived to regret it. You betrayed me at Ypres, you betrayed Ellen, you betrayed every man who followed you. Tonight the wheel comes full circle. At midnight the lights will die, and so will you. The gun is loaded. Use it on yourself, and spare the family the shame of a trial. If you do not, the next bullet has your name on it." There was no signature, only a crude drawing of a sprig of holly with 3 red berries. The room was so still they could hear the snow sliding from the eaves outside. Poirot turned the paper over. On the reverse, in Sir Reginald's own hurried scrawl, were the words, "Forgive me, I cannot." "He knew," Diana whispered. "All along he knew someone intended to kill him tonight." "And he came anyway," Poirot said softly, "because he wished to make amends before he died. That is why he opened the 76 brandy. Why he summoned me. Why he told Miss Graves, after midnight everything changes. He planned to confess everything at breakfast and let justice take him, murderer, coward, or both." Clarissa sank into a chair, hands over her face. Geoffrey's voice was hoarse. "Then Aunt Felicity's confession was only half the truth," Poirot finished. "She believed she was protecting the family honor by killing a man who intended to disgrace it. But she was manipulated. Someone else wrote this letter. Someone who hated Sir Reginald far more than mere money or reputation could explain." He looked slowly around the room, letting his gaze rest on each face in turn. "Observe the details. The letter is typed on a Remington portable. The E sits slightly high, the same floor as the forged note found in Lady Harrington's bag. The paper is pre-war army issue, watermarked 1915. The pistol is German, taken from a dead officer at Passchendaele. Whoever wrote this has carried hatred for 20 years, waiting for the perfect moment." He placed the letter and gun carefully on the mantelpiece. "Now we ask, who among you knew the exact details of what happened at Ypres? Who had access to Sir Reginald's old campaign trunk in the attic? Who could forge Clarissa's handwriting well enough to fool her own husband?" The Reverend David Whitcomb stirred. "You are suggesting a ghost wrote that letter?" "Non, mon père. I am suggesting a man who should have been a ghost." Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small dog-eared photograph. the attic camera's second plate, developed in secret while the household slept. It showed a young officer in 1916 laughing, arm slung around Sir Reginald's shoulders. The face was unmistakable, though 20 years younger, harder, burned by sun and war. David Whitcomb, the clergyman, looked at the photograph without surprise. "I wondered when you would find that one," he said quietly. Diana gasped. "You? But you're—" "David Whitcomb is the name I took when I came home from France," he said. "My real name was David Masterson. Lieutenant David Masterson, second in command to Captain Reginald Harrington at the time your father ordered a retreat that was never authorized. We left 300 men to die in a gas cloud, while Reggie saved his own skin. My older brother was among them." He smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes, cold, winter-light eyes. "I survived the war by a miracle. Shell shock, they called it. I spent 10 years in and out of hospitals, preaching to empty chapels, waiting for God to give me a sign. Then I read that Sir Reginald Harrington was hosting a Christmas house party and required a locum tenens for his village church over the holiday. The sign had come." Clarissa made a small animal sound. Whitcomb continued, almost gently. "I came here 3 weeks ago. I found the old letters, the gun, the truth. I watched him drink himself towards courage. I wrote the midnight letter. I loosened the fuse. I placed the poisoned glass in his hand when the lights died. 8 seconds is a very long time when one has rehearsed in the dark." He looked at Poirot with something close to admiration. Aunt Felicity believed she was the murderer because she had tampered with the punch earlier in the evening. A harmless sleeping draught, she thought, to keep Reggie quiet until she could reason with him. When he died anyway, she assumed her dose had been too strong. She confessed to protect the rest of us. Poor, stupid, loyal Felicity. Geoffrey took 1 step forward, fists clenched. "You bastard!" Whitcomb raised the Luger with the calm of a man who has nothing left to lose. "Careful, my son. The wheel has turned. Your father destroyed my family. Tonight, I have destroyed his." Poirot moved, so quickly that no one saw the cane leave his hand until it struck Whitcomb's wrist with a crack like a branch breaking. The pistol spun across the carpet. In the same instant, Briggs and the footman flung themselves forward. The clergyman was borne to the ground, face pale and serene, even as his arms were pinned. Poirot recovered the gun and stood over him. "You are mistaken, mon père," he said quietly. "The wheel does not turn, it merely grinds. And tonight it has ground 2 lives to powder for the sins of 1. There is no justice in that, only waste." He looked at the Christmas tree, the untouched presents, the cold candles. "Joyeux Noël," he murmured. "The bells will ring for a funeral tomorrow." Outside the snow began again, soft and relentless, covering footprints, blood, and broken holly alike. Chapter 10. The Final Unwrapping. Boxing Day dawned iron-grey, and still the snow had ceased in the night, leaving the moor a white desert broken only by the black scars of dry stone walls. A single set of tire tracks, the local constable's ancient Austin, led up the drive like the first hesitant line on a blank page. The police had arrived at last. Poirot stood on the terrace, coat buttoned to the throat, watching the men from the yard tramp back and forth between the gunroom and the ice-house, their voices carried across the frozen air. Clipped, official, already writing the story that would appear in tomorrow's newspapers. Tragic family quarrel. Elderly aunt distraught. Clergyman deranged by war memories. A tidy ending, almost. Inside the drawing room, the Christmas tree had been stripped of its finery. The candles were gone, the glass icicles packed away, the presents distributed without ceremony. only one parcel remained. Small and plain, lying on the mantel where Sir Reginald's last letter had rested. Poirot entered quietly. The family sat scattered like pieces knocked from a chessboard. Clarissa upright and bloodless, Geoffrey staring at nothing, Diana red-eyed beside Helen Graves, who had not yet decided whether she was mourner or heiress. The Reverend David Whitcomb, David Masterson, had been taken away an hour earlier. He had gone without resistance, almost with relief, the cuffs glinting on his wrists like cruel communion bracelets. Poirot closed the door. "One last matter," he said, "before the world intrudes." He picked up the remaining parcel. It was addressed in Sir Reginald's own hand to Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Clarissa's eyebrows rose. "He left you a Christmas gift?" "In a manner of speaking." Poirot unwrapped it with the same reverence he had shown the Luger box. Inside was a fat vellum envelope sealed with green wax and the Harrington crest. He broke the seal, a single sheet, folded once. "My dear Poirot, if you are reading this, I am dead, and the worst has happened. I summoned you not to prevent a murder. I no longer have the right to ask that, but to ensure that when it came, the truth would follow quickly. I have lived too long with lies. Everything you need is in the safe behind the Romney portrait, the original forged orders from 1917, Helen's letters, the medical reports from the asylum where Masterson was meant to have died in 1923. He did not die. I paid for his silence then. Tonight he collects the final installment. I go now to the Long Gallery to drink what has been prepared for me. I am tired, and I am at last ashamed. Tell my children I loved them poorly but completely. Tell Helen her portion is already in trust. No court can touch it. Tell Clarissa the estate is hers to save or burn. I leave the choice to her. And tell Masterson, when you catch him, that I forgive him. I have no other gift to offer. R.H. Christmas Eve, 1936. Eschew. Poirot folded the letter and slipped it into his breast pocket, next to his heart. Clarissa spoke first, voice cracked but steady. He knew. All along he knew. And he walked to meet it. He wished, Poirot said gently, to pay a debt that only his death could balance. A soldier's death, in the end. Gianna began to cry again quietly. Helen put an arm around her, half-sisters sharing the same impossible father. Geoffrey stood abruptly. "The safe," he said. "We should open it." They processed to the Long Gallery like a funeral cortege. The portrait of the young officer, Reginald Harrington, 1914, laughing and invincible, swung aside on silent hinges. Inside the safe lay everything the letter had promised: documents, bank drafts, a small velvet box containing Ellen Graves's wedding ring that had never been given. Poirot closed the safe and spun the dial. "These will go to the proper authorities," he said, "but the trust for Mademoiselle Helen is ironclad. Sir Reginald saw to that before Christmas Eve." Helen looked at him with drowned eyes. "I never wanted money. I wanted a father." "You had one," Poirot replied. "For one evening he was the father you deserved. It is not nothing." Outside, the police sergeant approached the terrace, helmet tucked beneath his arm. "Mr. Poirot, sir. The Chief Inspector's compliments. And if you'd be so kind as to give a statement." Poirot nodded. Before he left, he turned once more to the silent group. "Christmas," he said, "is the season when we are meant to believe in miracles. Tonight there were none. Only men and women doing what they believed they must. Some chose courage too late. One chose vengeance too long. And one old woman chose loyalty to ghosts." He looked at the stripped Christmas tree, bare now as Good Friday. But the wheel does not merely grind, mes amis. Sometimes, if we are very fortunate, it stops. and we are allowed to begin again." He bowed, small, neat, impeccable, and stepped out into the pale Boxing Day light. Behind him, in the cold drawing-room, Diana Harrington reached for her half-sister's hand. Helen took it. Clarissa watched them with eyes that had forgotten how to weep. Geoffrey stood alone by the window, staring at the moor as though searching for something that had already gone. High above, in the attic no one would enter again for many years, a single sprig of holly lay on the dusty floor. Its berries had fallen, one by one, until only the sharp green leaves remained. Outside, the snow began to melt,